I'm Lauren Sega, Manager of Communications for Homeport, a nonprofit affordable housing developer in Central Ohio. We're in one of the fastest growing areas in the country, and while we've seen the growth, we've felt the pains that come along with it, especially when it comes to housing all of us and our incoming neighbors. Each month, we're interviewing local experts on the issues, the barriers, and the solutions around housing and development, hoping to shed some light on how we got where we are and what we can do to create a future that houses everyone. This is Level With Us. Today I'm joined by Catherine Girves, Principal Planner with Toole Design, and Tobi Otulana, Project Planner with Toole Design, as well as Homeport CEO and President Leah Evans. Together we cover the gaps in transportation options here in Central Ohio, how we created a car-centric culture, how we can make it more inclusive, and how it all intersects with affordable housing policy.
I think it's interesting to reflect on even like the consumer palette for the kind of initiatives that we're talking about.
You may recognize this voice as Leah Evans, Homeport President and CEO. She's been on other Level With Us episodes, including our first episode, Level Setting, and our second bonus-ode, Funding Black Homeownership.
We didn't get here because, just from the lack of planning, intentionality. We got here because people wanted to live in suburban communities that they drove to, and they worked somewhere, and then they drove to this place, right? Like we built this very car-centric community based on what those with resources could do, right? Which is drive to a place where they lived, and then drive to a place where they worked, and then drive to a place where they shopped. And so when you're thinking about what you want a community to look like, you want it to be inclusive. I think that's what Catherine and we are talking about. Like you want it to be a community whereby those with resources can live in a car-centric community, and they can drive back and forth to all their different things as they choose. But you also want those that don't have those choices to have access to the same things. So how do you have that both and approach that really serves the spectrum of people that live in your community and isn't designed just for those that maybe have the most resources and the most opportunity to take advantage of those different geographies, when you may have a person that pretty much stays within the 3 to 5 miles of their community that they can access with their feet or with a bike or with these other modes or with the bus. They should have, again, that access to those same resources that allows them to live well, to live in a community that they can get to a grocery and to a doctor and to school and still have that same chance. And I think that's maybe what got lost as we really built more car-centric communities and really kept building out and out and out. And density really wasn't something we were focused on, but you can see that density in our first ring suburbs, our first ring legacy communities. You see that density, and then we moved away from it.
I think we can't forget the role that policies play in influencing folks' behavior.
This is Catherine Girves. Before becoming a principal planner for city planning company Toole Design Group, Catherine served 7 years as executive director of Yay Bikes, an organization that advocates for safe and comfortable transportation options for cyclists.
I was talking to a transportation engineer recently who said, what if we just decided we were never going to build another dangerous road? Mm-hmm. What if we decided we were only going to build roads that were safe for all travelers, which means you can't have these really wide roads, because it's not only not safe for the people walking and biking, it's not safe for the people driving. Those are the roads that people die on. Mm-hmm. If we made that decision, that would absolutely influence what our transportation infrastructure looked like, and therefore influence where housing was desirable and how a variety of other land uses. Mm-hmm. So we could make decisions with our policies, whether we're looking at it from a housing perspective or a transportation perspective, to actually get what we want. Mm-hmm.
You got to drive that line in the sand. Like, we're not going to do this anymore. And so what does that mean? The resulting activity looks like that the market has to respond to, where development opportunities are, where the buildings get built, where things get sited. Respond to that public policy initiative that you put out on the front side.
That policy has been slow to come, but with Link Us coming up on this year's ballot, there will be more opportunities for serious discussion around what kind of transportation options we offer as a region, and how we ensure that those options are diverse in their available modes, car and bus rapid transit lanes, bike paths, walking paths, and so on, as well as who they serve. That means more consideration about where development occurs, where affordable development occurs, and how these diverse transportation options interact with these developments and connect them with key destinations, such as job centers, schools, and amenities.
Certainly we can do better. We can do better as it relates to transportation, particularly for people who maybe can't afford to own, operate, and maintain a car. And I think that's where the intersection between transportation and housing is thinking about like where we're citing not only where our housing is, particularly our affordable housing, but how we cite schools, how we cite grocery stores, how we cite the variety of employment centers, and thinking about how do people safely move from one place to another, whether they're in a car or walking or using a bus or using a bike or a scooter or the variety of ways that people move around. And we don't have that figured out here yet.
At the end of the day, all of these systems interact. The healthcare system, the transportation system, the education system, the housing system, all of these systems interact. How do we go into it with that mindset that we all depend on each other to work well and to actually serve the community? So then now, what's the unique piece that needs to be related to transportation? What's the unique piece related to schools? What's the unique piece related to housing?
It's true, everything interacts. So how do you build out a transportation network that reflects that? Policy of the past has privileged the wealthy and well-resourced, but Tobi Otulana sparks a conversation about creating an inclusive planning process that enables planners to gain more insight from a broader survey pool.
When it comes to thinking about retrofitting roads and reconstructing roads and thinking about how to manage the system that we have now, it's about understanding, having an inclusive planning process. The decision to build a road or a strode with multiple lanes between one neighborhood in a more suburban area and a downtown area, if you're only talking to people in certain areas in that suburban area, if you're only talking to the person who is employing all the people in the suburban area, you're going to hear great feedback about this road. If you talk to the people who live along those communities, you're going to hear different needs, different things that they need from that road to be able to get to the places that they need and want to go. And having that perspective from the beginning, in the planning process, in the design process. When you start the design process, there's another planning process, like having folks involved who are the most impacted by the land use changes, by the transportation changes. It's going to give a completely different perspective. You're not going to build a 4-lane road through a neighborhood when you hear that people need to cross that road. And the thing is, people will figure it out as you're trying to reconstruct that road or figure out what it's already built. Now what do we do? If you talk to people, they have been navigating and figuring out how to get to where they need to go. So talk to them again. They have solutions that they're doing. They have solutions that they would like to see. And so it's really about that inclusive planning process, and then like on a larger picture, like just the profession being more inclusive so that the folks who are involved on the professional side have those experiences, have those connections to the community, and can continue that process. So it's like reciprocal.
When we think about who has resources, like there are a variety of ways we can define that. Like we're all children. How much do we talk to parents of children, and how much do we talk to children about how they move from one place to another, and what kind of communities? If we're lucky, we all get to age where it may not make sense to drive. Lots of us know people with disabilities. And like those are all three populations that may or may not have financial resource, like the ability to access a car, but they may not have the physical ability that it would make sense to use a car. And so if we are not thinking about how to make it possible for all of us to move from one place to another, we absolutely lose the expertise and the resource of all of those communities of people that are interested in participating in community life and that we are interested in having them participate in community life, and we've created conditions that just shut out whole populations of people from being full participants in the community.
I think it's a really good call out to the diversity of thought that goes behind different lived experiences. And so how do you incorporate that? I think that's what you're really talking about. How do you incorporate that into a planning process effectively? It's not just a public meeting, right? It's not just, a survey. It actually has to be listening and hearing from people. As you said, people are already navigating some of our most dangerous roads. Like I live over here in the Northeast area. You see people walking down Sunbury all the time. It is frightening. So it is very frightening. But people do it, right? You're saying like they're figuring it out because that's what they have to do. So even in that instance, that's information we can use. I think that's such a how Green raised Catherine. That's when you and I got to spend a lot of time when we were both on that with that organization. That's one of the things that I think observations of how people are using trails or roads or sidewalks is also an effective way of not just having people have to come bring you information. They're already giving you information by how they're using the system.
Absolutely.
And that's one thing that can inform the process also.
There's this conventional way that our profession has done engagement that has not served us well at all. And so thinking about observing what people are doing and then also being deliberate about going to places where people already are, where people are already gathered and learning from their lived expertise. And I think another part of that has to be measuring who we are currently engaging with. I know that in particularly a lot of the engagement methodologies that I use, that clients want me to use that are more conventional, we ask people socio-demographic questions like, what's your race? What zip code do you live in? In these 3 income categories, where do you fall? Because I think if we don't measure it, then it's easy for people to say, well, we made it open to everyone. And when you can show, okay, yes, we made the survey open to everyone, and 90% of respondents made over $150,000 a year, and were white and worked a first shift job, like we are missing important information about how communities are actually working.
Keeping in mind too that especially I think of neighborhoods like Linden, where there's been a lot of planning processes started and updated and lots of things like that, and so making sure you're looking at that and not asking people questions that they were asked last year and the year before and the years before that, and understanding that as you're measuring that there are going to be like Catherine said, strategies that work better than others. Don't try and force it. If you can spend an extra $1,000 to try and get 15 more Black people to take your survey, or you can spend that time going somewhere and talking to people, and maybe you only have 6 conversations, but they're each 15 to 20 minutes, you're going to get so much more relationship building, understanding of their life and how they travel and how they access place. And so being strategic and intentional with the strategies that you're using, and also that feedback loop I think is really important too, coming back to the same places, telling people this is how, thank you again, and this is how I used, we use the information. Yeah, I think all of that is really important for building trust.
I think you're right. Again, the process has been around long enough now that people are built some distrust of it, right? Yes, there's another survey. Oh, yes, they're doing another plan. Oh, yes, they're doing, right? And so how do you reestablish that even interest in participating? I think right now, obviously, the city's going through a zoning change, and, obviously these talking points we're talking about are not exclusive to the city of Columbus, but I'll just use that zoning change as an example as this. Why would I individually care about that? Now, my normal everyday life is, if not this job that I have, if I had a different job, why would I care about that? And I think that connectivity to, as you're saying, Tobi, what is it that matters to the individual? What is it that matters to our citizens and our residents? And what does it matter to them? They may not engage in a process that they don't see themselves in, but we can talk to them about what matters to them, right? Like, so we can, ask maybe a different set of questions. We can seek out a different kind of input to understand how they're interacting, whether that's for us with housing or with transportation or with any of these public investments. How are they interacting with it may not be a direct line that you can ask a straight question for. Like, you can ask, do you think this road should have a bike trail? Yes, I guess. I'm not going to that may not be the question. It may be, well, how do you get back and forth? When's the last time you went to the doctor? Oh, how do you get your kids to school? What happens when they're carrying a book bag? Like, you just ask some different questions about their lived experience to really understand where are the ways that we can intersect and really serve the population better.
Sometimes people will give you answers that feel like they're not related, but when you lean in with curiosity, they're always related somehow. I was working on a school travel plan in a community where deportation kept coming up, and people were the folks who were the formal decision makers were wondering, like, why are we paying attention to deportation? And the more we leaned in and the more curious we were about why this came up, we realized that the impact of deportations in this community was absolutely influencing how safe parents felt allowing their kids to walk or bike to school. Wow. And what kind of stressors kids were feeling and how that might influence behaviors walking and biking to school. Like, it had everything to do with the safety of walking and biking to school. So approaching with curiosity what people are saying and trusting that it has something to do with what you're talking about until you can make those connections.
And I think it can take, especially as planners, even as we say all of this, we have our manuals and guides that we go to, and we still have something in our mind of, like, this is what maybe should be here. This is the type of infrastructure that could help. And I think really being intentional about stepping out of that and listening to people. I think of Dr. Destiny de Guzman, who she did a lunch webinar at Kira at OSU maybe last year, and she was talking about a very long corridor-long project in California that she was working on. She worked at the state at the time, and it went through lots of different types of communities, and there were more suburban, wealthier communities, and they wanted a separated bike lane or whatever it was, and then it went through a marginalized community, maybe as majority Black community, and the state was like, well, great, you want a separated bikeway? We all want a separated bikeway. This is what we're putting in. And they were getting pushback on that. And, there was this mindset of, like, we can't have this gap in this facility. We just can't comprehend that we can have this gap in the facility. And people are biking in this area. Why don't they want this? And Dr. de Guzman, through her work with community and relationship building, that found that a better solution ultimately was just better maintenance of the sidewalk that they have in that area. It has cracks, it has gaps, it has not been maintained to the level on this side or on this side of, the other sides of the corridor in wealthier communities. And that was, I'm sure took time for that decision to be swallowed by Cal State, but that was what the community needed. They needed the state or their jurisdiction to show that they cared to maintain what they had put there. And maybe down the line, that facility looks different and that connects better. But that was building trust and showing, like, we will maintain what we put in your community, and make sure that what is there is safe to use, and we'll support the way that you ride your bike. We will support the way that you ride in this community, which is not right now with a separated bike lane. And so I think that I think of that all the time, of, like, the answers that we have in our heads are not necessarily the answers. There might be completely different solutions and things that seem like they go against what we learned in school, but that doesn't mean they're wrong. And that doesn't mean that it still means we're helping people move more safely.
I'm reminded of the conversation we were in last night about Cleveland Avenue as we were traveling down Cleveland Avenue. Like, what would it mean if we just maintained Cleveland Avenue well for the pedestrians who are currently walking on it
every day?
If if the drainage on the roads was such that when a car was driving down Cleveland Avenue during a major rainstorm, that the pedestrians were not splashed as they were waiting at a bus stop, as they were walking down the street, that there was an actual buffer between the pedestrian facility and between the sidewalk and the street. Like, man, what would it look like to just tell people, we see you, and I wouldn't want this in my neighborhood, and therefore I don't want it in your neighborhood either. I'm going to invest here.
I think that's a wonderful example, Tobi, as you think about what was the cost saved in that scenario, where this was about sidewalk maintenance, not necessarily about building a whole new bike trail. Like, that's, I think, a very interesting observation of a willingness to pivot. I think you talked about risk taking earlier, a willingness to pivot. Like, we had this plan. What are you talking about? No, we're going to pivot. Yeah. We're going to make a change, and actually save some public dollars by doing this execution versus trying to build something that, was the preference of another neighborhood and another jurisdiction and another community. I think that speaks to the power of the community to really be able to be at the table with solutions, with the planners, with the policymakers, with the investment teams. Like, the community really can be a source of the solutions that we're seeking. And whether we're talking about our transportation needs, our housing crisis, the community is there, and they may have the answers that may look different and may not be as costly, or they may be just different, and that we be willing to make those pivots and willing to admit that we don't know. Because we don't, right? We don't have all the answers. We don't know. We're making, as far as planners, like you said, we're basing some of our planning policies and things that we do based on principles that were designed generations ago by people who did not look like us. And so now we're really having to open our understanding of what the future of our communities could look like, it mostly informed by the people who live in them, more so than those practices and policies of the past. I love that example. Thank you for sharing.
And I think data is a piece of it also on the transportation planning side. As we're building out networks or deciding what projects to do or prioritize or fund, a lot of the time communities will use data, and I think maybe there's an opportunity for some collaboration between transportation agencies and housing organizations to think of some creative ways to be able to share that data in a way that's, of course, like respectful of people's privacy and things like that. But I'm thinking of a project that we worked on in Austin. They had a walking, biking, and crossings and trails plan, and they had a database. The city already had a database of affordable housing locations, and we could filter by how long it was affordable or what percentage of affordability it was focused on, and then as a planning team, we were able to use that resource and use that to identify a network, identify projects, prioritize projects. And so I think that's something that could be really valuable for decision makers, that can factor into maintenance. Let's think about where these locations are when we're plowing snow from the streets and things like that. And so I think that's another area where we can do better to understand where those, especially like you said, 30% lower AMI areas are, or housing opportunities are, and plan intentionally.
That data piece is obviously critically important. We're all, bombarded with data right now, but really understanding how it can be utilized to advance projects. I think that goes back to your earlier dream idea of a collaborative system where if someone's asked a question, someone does this survey over here, it has information that it's needed over here as well. But using the statistics, the information we have, directly access to, how do you evaluate the safety of a road? We use data to do that. And so we have so much information that maybe we could deploy in other ways to advance some of the efforts we're trying to, and some of the goals that we have that we're wanting to achieve, that how do we use that and connect it back to the work and investments that we do in the future. I think that's a rich resource, is the data that we have about utilization, lifestyle, marketing, where people are shopping, where do we see traffic, where do we see activity, and using that as a driver for decision making.
We've learned how to gather inclusive data. Now, how can we use the data that organizations collect in their silos to create a more collaborative response to our housing and transportation problems? We explore that further in part 2 of this conversation next month. We will have some bonus content from our chat in the interim, covering the age-old question, what comes first, transit or density? Catch you in the next one. Level With Us is brought to you by Homeport and is recorded, mixed, and edited by Lauren Sega. All sources are in the show notes. Homeport creates strong communities by developing quality, affordable homes on a cornerstone of dignity, security, and opportunity. To learn more, or if you'd like to support our mission, visit us at homeportohio.org.